Hey, Katie. We have The Sign of the Twisted Candles. We are on Chapter 6, An Important Errand. Nancy urged Carol to talk quickly before they might be interrupted. The girl seemed hesitant to say more. Oh, Nancy, I wish I was as smart as you are. Everything seems so clear to you. To me, it's all a muddle. Nonsense, Nancy replied. Just tell me whatever comes to your mind. All right, but it's difficult. Maybe I'd better talk about myself first. I'm an orphan. I guess you'd gathered that from what Mother Jemmett said. I know nothing about my parents. I was found in a church when I was 2 years old. The authorities couldn't locate any of my family, so I was sent to an orphanage. I lived there until I was 10 years old when the Jemmets took me. I've worked hard for them. Every day after school I would come home to find dishes and clothes piled up for me to wash. As soon as the law allowed me to leave school, they made me stay home. Mr. Sidney urged them to let me go on, but they wouldn't do it. I don't think I owe the Jemmets anything. I've paid my way. Mr. Sidney was always nice to me, but after the Jemmets practically forced him to stay in the tower by telling him he wasn't well and that he'd fall if he tried to come downstairs, they began to make me work harder and never let me go anywhere. That's a shame, said Nancy. Was it after Mr. Sidney stayed upstairs that you first suspected that Mr. Jemmett was not being fair? Yes. Carol, warmed by the new friendship, leaned toward Nancy, her eyes round with excitement. I'm pretty sure Father Jemmett is robbing Mr. Sidney. I've seen him sneaking around mysteriously and going to town with packages. After that, he suddenly seems to have a lot of money, much more than this restaurant brings in. Of course, That's very interesting, Nancy said loudly. Once we had some baby robins in a vine outside a bedroom window, too. Do you have many wrens? Carol's mouth opened wide in astonishment. Good morning, miss, said a man's voice. Carol gulped. The voice was that of Frank Jemmett, and at once she understood why Nancy had suddenly interrupted her conversation with a strange remark about birds. Have you been served? Miss Jemmett asked, approaching the table. Carol, get up and bring the young lady a glass of water. Oh, please, don't bother, Nancy smiled, restraining Carol. I wasn't planning to eat lunch so early. Jemmett pulled a chair from an adjoining table and prepared to join the conversation. You live hereabouts? He asked Nancy. In River Heights, she answered. I came back this morning with my father, whom Mr. Sidney wished to consult. Oh, are you Dr. Crosby's daughter? Jemmett asked. I knew he had a beautiful daughter, but I didn't dream. Oh, what a sleaze. I don't know Mr. Crosby, Nancy put in. My father is Carson Drew. Frank Jemmett's face turned a shale paler, and he swallowed heavily. Carson Drew, he's upstairs? He asked. Yes, he's been there for over an hour now, Nancy replied coolly. It must be an important consultation. I'm sure it can't be. Yes, it must be, Jemmett stammered, rising hurriedly. Excuse me. The agitated man fled from the room. Nancy watched his retreat with amusement. She wondered if he was a thief, and perhaps afraid that Mr. Sidney had discovered that he was dishonest and was going to take action. I never saw Father Jemmett so upset, Carol commented. He seemed to be scared of your father. Which would confirm your suspicions and mine, Nancy remarked. I think I'll keep an eye on Mr. Jemmett. Oh dear, I've talked too much, Carol sighed. Maybe I'm all wrong. At that moment, Nancy heard her father's footsteps on the stairway. She arose and hurried to the hall. Are you ready to go? She asked. No, Mr. Drew replied. Mr. Sidney's case is strange and complicated. After what I've heard, I shall not leave this house until the document is witnessed by someone competent to stand up under grueling trial in court. He went into the hall telephone booth and made a call. Nancy saw him frown, and in a minute came out, looking disappointed. The man I want to reach will be out for half an hour. I didn't want to give the message to anyone else. Nancy, I guess you'll have to help me. Speed is essential. Will you drive to the Smith's Ferry branch of the River Heights National Bank and ask for Mr. Hill, Raymond Hill? He's the executive vice president. Tell Mr. Hill that I want him to come back here with you to witness an important document. I'm well acquainted with him, and I'm sure he will grant me this favor. Remember, the sooner you get back with him, the better. I'll go at once. Nancy replied, excited by the new element of the mystery. She ran back to the table and told Carol that she had to go on an important errand for her father, but that she would return shortly. As Nancy was talking, she saw the swinging door which led to the kitchen move slightly. Someone was listening. I think I'll go out this way. It's shorter, she said abruptly, skipping across to the kitchen door and suddenly pushing it ajar. As she had expected, the door did not open far, and there was a muttered exclamation from behind it. Oh, I'm so sorry. Did I hit somebody? Nancy asked. Mrs. Jemmett was revealed, looking rather dazed and rubbing her ear. No, not much, she said sarcastically. The woman wheeled about, darted through the kitchen, and vanished into the garden. Nancy was at her heels, but Mr. Drew called her back. You were a little too fast for me, he smiled. I just wanted to tell you that Peter Boonton and Jacob Sidney, the two men you told me about, are coming here this morning. We want the will signed and witnessed before they arrive. That's the reason I'm asking you for the greatest possible speed. Nancy nodded and left the house. She saw Jemmett, who seemed to be having difficulty starting his automobile. His wife, her back to Nancy, was beside the car, talking and gesticulating violently to him, so she's gesturing. She's probably telling him about my errand, Nancy thought, so I must hurry. On the other hand, I may never have another opportunity to look at that buried box. I must find out if it belongs to Asa Sidney. Out of sight of the Jemmets, she ran to the barn. It took only a moment to roll away the logs in the improvised woodpile and uncover what Jemmett had buried underneath. If it's what I think, I'm sure Dad would want me to take the chest to the bank, young sleuth told herself. The loose dirt was easy to brush aside, and anxiety gave Nancy added strength. She saw at a glance that the chest was indeed the one with the carved twisted candles and marked Private Property of Asa Sidney. She lifted it out. Lugging the heavy ebony and brass chest, Nancy went around the far corner of the house and climbed into her car. She started the motor, locked the doors, and sped off. The highway ahead was clear. Nancy glanced into her rear vision mirror to see if anyone was on the road behind. What she feared was true. Frank Jemmett's big car had lurched onto the road and was roaring after her. Does he know where I'm going and why? She thought. Jemmett's car, although left behind by Nancy's first burst of speed, began to crawl up. There's no doubt about it, he's after me, Nancy told herself. Either he's going to prevent my bringing Mr. Hill or force me to give up the stolen chest. Uh-oh. We'll have to see if she can outrun him or what's going to happen there.